Okay, let's start. Excellencies, ladies and dear audience, good afternoon from UNESCO Paris and welcome to this 5th edition of UNESCO's webinar series. My name is Anna Maria Mylöf and I am the acting chief of the Inclusion and Rights section at UNESCO headquarters. The aim of the webinar is really to exchange experiences and expertise on the measures to address the COVID-19 crisis with a focus on the social dimension of leaving no one behind and also on actions taken to combat racism and discrimination. Today's edition is going to focus on the efforts made by leaders to combat the virus at local and national levels, and also discuss the initiatives that you have implemented through your leadership and social innovation solutions. Now, we have 5 exceptional women with us today from all walks of life, spanning from India and Sierra Leone to Turkey, Norway, and Canada. And our moderator today is our dear colleague from the UNESCO office in New Delhi, Juan Pablo Ramirez Miranda, who will tell you more about the speakers in a while. I would like to remind you about the upcoming webinars. All of them are thematic, starting from next week, and they will continue until June or maybe even July in various topics. And I think that you will find the link of the webinars in the comment space. One of the topics are gender-based violence, indigenous people, ethics and human rights, slavery, and even art. Before Juan Pablo will start to speak, I would just like to give the floor very quickly to my colleague, John Crawley, who is Chief of Research, Policy and Foresight, and he will briefly inform us about the UNESCO initiative that is going to be launched next week called Women's Voices. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria. Great pleasure to join you. Thank you for the opportunity to address you very briefly. In discussing with Anna Maria just a couple of days ago, we realized that it would be very timely to give you this information because there's actually a perfect coincidence between what you're discussing today and some things that UNESCO is deeply committed to. Let me put it in very simple terms. A couple of months ago, when the pandemic started, there was a flurry of special issues of magazines and journals about, thinking the pandemic, imagining what comes next. You know the titles and their equivalents in every language. And what was very striking was how gender imbalanced that thinking, that imagining was. And the Director General of UNESCO was particularly struck by a French newspaper, which published a special issue on imagining what comes next, imagining the world to come, which the cover of which was entirely made up of 4 photographs of faces, and all of those faces were male. And her immediate reaction was, 1, this is unacceptable. Many people said the same. And secondly, what can UNESCO do about it? And the consequence of that has been twofold. First, the desire to position UNESCO as a laboratory of ideas for the world, which is actually what our medium-term strategy already says, but just making sure that instead of simply saying it, we actually do it. So what would it mean for UNESCO to be a global laboratory of ideas? So the Director General has asked for some serious work to go into this issue and for appropriate processes to be designed. And secondly, the first immediate thing we are doing in terms of this laboratory of ideas is precisely to give voice to women. Not just to talk about women's issues, but to talk about the world as it is, the world that we're coming from, which created the conditions for the situation we are in, and the world to come, which will emerge from a pandemic period that we can see lasting perhaps for considerably longer than some of us envisaged when we first went into lockdown last March. If you look on UNESCO's website, the first 3 videos have already been put online, actually. If you look at en.unesco.org/forum, you will see videos from climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe, from the current chair of the most scientific advisory committee, Professor Nri Lumumba, and from the outgoing past president of the most scientific advisory committee, Dr. Fadia Kiwan. So 3 women, 3 different disciplinary fields, 3 different regions, 3 different approaches, only one of them, Fadia, to some extent talking about women's issues, but each of them offering a distinctive women's view on the situation, connecting the dots, connecting climate change, connecting environmental degradation, connecting social inequality, connecting the challenges of information flows, the question of borders in a globalized world, increasingly being reshaped by a virus that does not recognize borders, all the sorts of things you can imagine. The official launch of this initiative will be on Monday, by which time there will be additional videos online, but you can already see the ones that are there as a kind of taster or teaser. And I think it connects beautifully, serendipitously, to the spirit of your discussion today. And I hope that the results of this discussion can also feed into our process of creating a process driven by ideas. And let me close with just one observation on that. Sometimes, and this is perhaps a very French distortion, when we're talking about ideas, we tend immediately to get very abstract, as if ideas were only really ideas when they were first framed in philosophical language, and secondly, disconnected from any practical application. This is wrong. Ideas don't have to be philosophical, and they don't have to be divorced from practical application. On the contrary, many of the ideas that need to feed UNESCO's Laboratory of Ideas process will come from our own programs, from the multiple stakeholders we interact with in implementing our activities in education, the sciences, culture, communication and information. We are in touch with these ideas already. We've just had a certain, perhaps, combination of reluctance and lack of process to learn from what we do. So I hope that this discussion can be one opportunity among many, and I really welcome and congratulate Anna Maria for running this series of webinars, can be one opportunity among many to do the thinking with our stakeholders and our networks, and then to consider how we can get the ideas that will come from your discussion flowing into a process of global conversation, of which UNESCO needs to be a hub, so that the ideas we need to make sense of the world we are in and the world that will need to come are connected organically to what we're doing. Not some kind of decorative intellectual cherry on the cake, but the actual flower that makes the cake, if you pardon the culinary metaphor. I'll stop with that. And I'll also just note on a strictly male angle that facial hair in the context of pandemic seems to be widely shared. I see, Juan Pablo, that you two have decided to grow a beard. It'll probably be time to shave it off once we exit from this current situation. But yes, nice, a gesture of facial hair solidarity across borders. Anyway, thank you very much for giving me the floor. Sorry for speaking probably longer than I should have, and I will listen with great interest to the rest of the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, John. And of course that you have to stay with us now when you had so many interesting things to tell us. I think that we all agree with what you said, and let's hope that this webinar is going to be a first step to our common cause. Juan Pablo, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. And I mean, of course, it's always good to give our faces a break in this context. Thank you, John, for noting that. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. My name is Juan Pablo Ramirez. I will be moderating the interaction between our distinguished panelists and all of you that are following this webinar. I would like to welcome you again to this series of webinars on inclusion in the time of COVID, and with this one with a specific focus on changemakers at the forefront of COVID-19 responses. As my colleagues have been already sharing with you, we are very privileged to have a set of very, very distinguished panelists who will share with us their thoughts and their perspectives on the actions that we can undertake to face this global crisis scenario, and maybe share from their experience what are some of the things that would be up for reflection, but also, as John was saying, for action. Without further ado, I will begin by giving the floor to our first panelist, who is Miss Ingjerd Schou, the Vice President of the Storting of Norway, sorry. She's a distinguished member of parliament with a long-standing career in Norway. She has also been Minister of Social Affairs in her country. And I would like to invite her to share with us her presentation. Madam Excellency, please, you have 10 minutes for this.
Thank you, and thank you so much for, and thanks to the UNESCO to have this webinar, and my colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you a little bit about leadership and how we also solved it in Norway. I think that communication is extremely important. In this situation, we must focus on giving factual information and do not contribute to confusion and uncertainty. And for me, leadership in this situation means that to take some hard decisions and explaining why they are necessary, it's very important, but also to communicate in a manner that does not create unnecessary fear, but at the same time does not give a false sense of security. It's also very important to be open and admit that these are uncertain times. We do not have all the answers. I think the same applies when speaking to children about the corona crisis. And I see my Prime Minister, she has experienced that during this uncertain times. We must explain why they can't play with their friends or go to school just now, but also assure them that things will return to normal and tell them it's allowed to be scared, confused, and so on. Today in Norway, schools and kindergarten is open with still taking care, 1 meter distance, using anti-bac and all that kind of things. So we are trying to come back to a little bit more normal situation. But we are all affected by this crisis, and no country can address it alone. We're only as strong as the weakest link, and a global challenge must have also global solutions. This is not the time for unilateral actions and protectionism, and global solidarity is in our own self-interest. In Norway, we took early and decisive action. The economic and social costs of our decisions are high. We locked down Norway almost in the beginning of March, and however, the price of inaction will be much higher if we hadn't done like that. Our mantra is that we are apart together. People stay at home to protect those most at risk. And I also think more internationally, because I like to address that since you are there and sure, we must recognize that this is a common global challenge. We will only succeed if everybody succeeds. We are all in this together. We're only as strong as the weakest link, as I mentioned, and a global challenge also have to have this global solution. This is not the time for unilateral actions and so on. But we must also listen to the UN Secretary General when he says that we must recover better, and that means that the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement must guide the recovery. When we look back at this crisis, I do hope that it will also have marked a turning point towards a sustainable future. At this time of great uncertainty, we need coordinated international and multilateral effort. A united global response must have a strong UN at its center. The coronavirus pandemic requires urgent humanitarian action as well as coordinated efforts to address the long-term efforts. And substantial financing package from the Multilateral Development Bank is also necessary. They provide both immediate support to keep economics afloat and longer-term financing to restart economic growth. We also need, I think, to start addressing the long-term consequences of the coronavirus. We can't wait until the crisis is over. Norway took the initiative to create a new UN multi-donor trust fund to assist countries in responding especially to the crisis and address its socio-economic impacts. All relevant UN organizations should be able to access the fund. The Secretary General has launched the fund. The fund should provide a coherent response from the UN at country level. It should go beyond the funds that are currently being mobilized just to address the humanitarian needs resulting from the crisis. The fund will cover response, impact and recovery similarly by the Ebola Response Fund as we have experienced so. And the fund must be complementary to UN Global Humanitarian Response Plan and the WHO Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan. The virus will hit countries with weak health system. A joint fund will provide predictably for our partners. It will contribute to more coherent and effective efforts to build more resilient health system. It will also provide funding to fight secondary effects of the crisis, such as unemployment. Norway already announced our first contribution of 150 million Norwegian crown. It's about 15, I think, million US dollar. And we encourage other countries also, as well as the private sector, to contribute. The current focus is on making the fund operational. There is good progress on this, and once the structures are in place, the call for funding and outreach to potential donors and recipients will start. We will support the UN in mobilizing donors, and we have already had positive interest from several partners. And so some words about the vaccine, because it's very important. It's a daily conversation in Norway. We must ensure that a vaccine, once developed, is made globally accessible and is rapidly and fairly distributed. This includes vulnerable groups and low-income countries. As a funding member and major donor to the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, Norway will continue to support efforts to develop an effective vaccine against the coronavirus. And I also like to say something about how we help each other, because we are all affected by the crisis and no country can address it alone. And we will continue to support the UN in the key role they have playing, also especially WHO and OCHA, to ensure a well-coordinated and effective response. Testing and treatment capacity in countries receiving humanitarian assistance is generally low, and populations are very often vulnerable. Some words to help and be good neighbors, not only in our Scandinavian neighborhood, but also in Europe. Norway have a good capacity in intensive care. And I myself has been earlier a hospital director and also starting this intensive care education in Norway. And we had to help also from Norway send a medical team to the Lombardy region of Italy to help in their desperate need of healthcare personnel due to the coronavirus emergency. We have a handle on the infection situation in Norway, why Italy is at the peak of its crisis. It is an appropriate time for us to assist a country facing enormous challenges. Solidarity in the whole world, but also in Europe, is not a theoretical exercise. And now it's time also to show what it means in practice. And I see that I have used my 10 minutes, and I would like to say that leadership, national leadership, is not only in a white paper. It's not only at the writing desk, but it's also practical, it's strategic, and it's very important how we manage to communicate, not only with elderly and adults, but also to children, because we have to be prepared to say it's allowed to be afraid. It's allowed to be have this fear, but it will normalize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for sharing this very rich and valuable presentation from your perspective. I invite all the participants to continue asking the questions using the little button that says Q&A under your screen, and you can bring them to us, so we have this second moment of interaction with all the panelists. Excellency, if you would like, I am going to bring some of the questions that have been already asked, that are pretty much related to what you have shared with us today. The first one is related to what you were saying when we talk with children, when we talk with the elderly, when we face the human side of things. From a Changemaker perspective, a participant, Siddhant Magon, is asking how should we address issues of mental health, and how should we even face issues related to cybercrime or bullying, or I mean in general, the changing context that we are facing now under these circumstances. How should we take it from an individual perspective?
Thank you. The Prime Minister in Norway and the responsible ministers, especially on education, on health, environmental and so on, they have every day since we locked down Norway in the beginning of March, had a press conference about 4 o'clock afternoon. And they're also journalists and had the possibility to ask questions, of course, after they had this press information, but also taking questions from the normal population about how can we be a good neighbor, how is it very useful to use the mobile phone, to have a chat and to take a phone call, and also to knock on the neighbor's door, but not go inside, just to ask, do you need any help? Do you need that I go and shop for you, and so on. So that is one answer. The others, the Prime Minister also had a press conference for children, only for children, that it was possible for children to ask on these chat possibilities, to ask questions to the Prime Minister. And she's well, my Prime Minister is a woman, and she's a good mother, and you see that she had this good position to really, but I think also fathers and men can do the same as prime ministers or minister of health, but also give the possibility to have this possibility to answer a children's fear, and how long will it be, how long will schools be locked down, the kindergarten, can I be with my friends, all that practical questions. But the issues about mental health, it's also a very directly demand to the healthcare in the basic small communities in Norway, that the health authorities and the health responsible in the community, together with voluntarily organizations, Red Cross, what you can in Norway call the organization for farmers and so on, and also for sports and so on, the leaders of the sports organization and that kind of things, also helping communicate and also to be a good neighbor and to assist their members in taking care, because it has been very difficult to be alone in this situation. And also when you, as added to that, have a mental disease. So then we can all imagine the difficulties, but the basic solutions has been tried to solve in the small communities and in the small neighborhoods, and also with help from the specialized and knowledge educated people in the healthcare sector in the small communities.
Thank you very much for your insights in this regard. The next question that we have is also related to those that may be needing some specific attention as part of our responses. We have a question asking how this crisis has impacted the situation of indigenous people in the case of Norway, and what type of responses we could provide for the impact of this crisis in them.
What did you call it? Was what kind of people did you mention?
Indigenous people.
Indigenous, yes. I just it felt out. I also have to say something about the false news, because it was a question about that.
Yes, please.
Because it has also been several issues about false news coming up in the newspaper and internet and all that kind of things, and that has also been addressed during this daily press conference. This week, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health and Education and so on, they have only press conference 2-3 times a week. So we have reduced it. But every time they also have this attack and try to take down this false news and give correct news. So they took every step by step. So we have a lot of, we have people coming to Norway and do not understand the Norwegian language and the messages from the authorities, as well as ordinary Norwegians lived there for generations. And more we have been aware that the information was not understood. And we had a very good, more and more prepared communication with their organizations, trying to have some written information, but also that the organization, some of them do not read either English or Norwegian. So try to have this translated to language that also people can understand, because they did not believe that we had to have this 2-meter distance. Today it's 1 meter. All the kind of washing and not going out in restaurants and so on, we have to translate and give good information. In the beginning, this was not handled in the best way, but as soon as we were aware of that this was a problem, we tried to solve it together with their organization, and also use some of the young daughters, sons, so on, because very often we saw that it was mothers and fathers that did not get this important information from the authorities.
Thank you very much. The next set of questions are again related to those that are in situation a little bit more vulnerable. You just spoke about those who may not be able to understand, but what is your experience on the impact of this crisis and the type of responses that we can provide for example, children with disabilities, those indigenous people that have also a different type of impact? There are some of the questions that are speaking about those that are in specific vulnerable situations.
In the beginning of March, the specialized healthcare and also the healthcare, primary healthcare out in the community was very focused on the corona virus. And very soon, the healthcare system in the communities and also in the specialized care reorganized to have a separate line of taking care of people with special needs, but also cancer, but also vulnerable, especially children and so on. So they had a separate line going out both in the specialized care health system in the hospitals, but also in the primary health cares. And we also organized in many communities. It was also organized that we had healthcare personnel together with teachers and other specialized personnel to take care of these vulnerable children, especially them with this, or also disabled people, adults and children. So it was also kind of another way of organizing a separate line and not in the same line as the coronavirus, because it was separately with a special entrance and all that kind of sort of things. But it has, from the beginning of March, it has improved, because it was not there in the beginning, because this was so rapidly decided to take down Norway, and then we had to try to reorganize many fields to take care of the people alone, the vulnerable, the disabled, and also people with mental health, and try to make it through the specialized, the primary, the volunteer organization, the neighbors, and all that kind that really make a good society in your closest neighborhood.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Our time for this Q&A has concluded. So I would like to thank you very much for your presentation, for being a part of this webinar, and we will be moving on. So
thank you so much. I will still listen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Excellency. We will now continue with our second presenter for today, who is Ms. Nandita Das, an actress and director who has acted in over 40 feature films, and who is also a very socially committed person doing different initiatives. And she will maybe be telling us a little bit more about that. But without further ado, I would like to invite Nandita Das for her presentation, and I will ask our participants to continue asking the questions using the little button down below. Thank you very much, Nandita. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Well, I'm no leader, unfortunately. I don't have the power to make those big changes. But I think art and cinema can play its own role in a small way to trigger conversations, to create awareness, to create empathy. But today what I really want to talk about is the ground realities, which are probably a little different from many parts of the world. Although the issue of migration is not unique to India, I think the scale definitely is. We've got about 40 million migrant workers. And in fact, our lives are so deeply intertwined. As you know, we have a large population, the costs are comparatively lower. There is a huge surplus in a way of labor, there's huge unemployment. So many of us who can afford help, we all have drivers, we have cooks, and we have housekeeping and house help, etc. Then there are those who work at the construction sites and, you know, making flyovers and malls and, you know, the street hawkers. So there's a huge population of migrant workers that are in any big city. I live in Mumbai, and there is a huge, huge population of the migrant laborers here as well. And I think when the lockdown happened, nobody fully knew that this would be a really big issue that would come up when migrant laborers didn't know where to go, because many of them were daily wagers. If they didn't earn, they just wouldn't be able to eat. So they were really caught between the health crisis and the economic crisis. I mean, it was really being caught between the virus and hunger. And we saw a crazy kind of exodus, you know, people, men, women, children, walking for miles, trying to go back to their homes. And in the lockdown, that wasn't really allowed. There were terrible incidents where they were being stopped and being sprayed with pesticides to disinfect them. So we've had, you know, we've seen images, we have seen videos, we have read and seen journalistic reports. And we shouldn't have been shocked, but in a way it has really shocked the country that the gap was always so enormous, that there was this other India that existed, that we were not so fully aware of to the extent that it has come out during the lockdown. And as always, women have to take the brunt of all these things. I mean, you know, women are carrying little children. They are having to not only take care of themselves, but being a traditional patriarchal society that it largely is, they have the burden of really taking care of the whole family. So whether they are in the villages, whether they are in the cities, whether they are the ones walking miles, so it's really been in some sense a wake-up call for not really realizing the magnitude of it, and there is really no clear solution that is emerging. And I think while the government has to do what it has to do, there are NGOs, there are individuals, there's been a lot of philanthropy as well. A lot of people have come forward, but I don't think there has been really a thought given to the fact that what is really going to happen. And women who are much lower in the hierarchy of things, they always have to bear the bigger brunt. Just yesterday, I read a story where a woman was pregnant and she was walking for miles, and in between she had to stop somewhere. She actually delivered a baby and continued walking. I mean, these kind of heartbreaking stories we have seen. We've heard about how families have walked for miles, reached their village, and a child has died. There's no end to this kind of a tragedy that is also unfolding along with this pandemic. And you know, one realizes that just to be able to be at home, to have a roof, to have food on your table, we always knew that, you know, many of us are very privileged, but I think even to be able to be locked down itself would be a privilege. We didn't really think about it. This whole thing of hashtag stay home, stay safe, it seems almost ironical because it's not only on the streets, but even the homes are so unsafe. The cases of domestic violence have almost grown more than 100%. And that too, many of these cases are unreported. So if the reported cases have gone 100%, we don't even want to imagine what the reality must be. The women are far more overburdened with, like, you know, with work, because it's all falling on them. A lot of the people who have in very privileged, educated homes, if they have house help, if they have a part-time house help or part-time cooks, they were all stopped. And all the work invariably sort of falls onto the, you know, especially working women. So there are women who are juggling with their work and taking care of their children. Children are, you know, their homework. So at every strata, if you see that women are having to bear the brunt. So while this whole scenario kind of makes you feel that, you know, women are the victim of it, like always, whether in war or whether in riots or, you know, whether in a natural calamity, women have to bear more than what they have to bear for their own lives, but also for their families and their immediate surroundings, and then the vulnerabilities that come with it. The sexual abuse has also increased. Child abuse, you know, young girl children and adolescent girls, that is also horrific. Figures have come out for that. But in all this, I also want to shed some light on the fact that it is also time that we bring out positive stories about the fact that women are also holding it all together. So yes, they are definitely the victims, and there's no way that we should overlook that, because otherwise we would never want to change the situation. But the fact that women are also taking the burden and fighting it and are able to handle all of this also is something that we need to acknowledge. That how women are being strong and how they are you know, handling the situation, how they are, you know, dealing with all the problems that they are going through, is also something that we need to shed some light on. In fact, in a very small way, I've tried to respond through a short film, and I'm very grateful to UNESCO and other UN organizations who I approached. And you know, they've come forward to support this small film, just so that we can spread the word, we can spread the helpline numbers, we can tell women that there is going to be someone who's going to listen to you, that it's important that you speak up. Because these unreported cases, if they're unreported, there is absolutely nowhere that you can even deal with it. Also, if we see in our own cinema, migrant workers, daily wagers, their stories have continuously decreased. I remember when I was a child, and we saw it even in our mainstream cinema. There were characters of people who were leading, who were workers, who were leading daily lives by pulling a rickshaw or working as a loader at a railway station or a daily wager. Those kind of protagonists are slowly vanishing. So I would also be curious to see that after this, when films again start coming out, are we going to tell these stories, or are we again going to go back to our old ways of what we think is entertaining, and and are not going to reflect the reality that has really hit us in our face? So I think in that sense, I would imagine that in India and elsewhere, there are women who are leaders. There are hundreds and thousands and millions of women who are in some ways taking up these leadership roles. I don't think there's any one significant woman leader that has come up in our in the country per se, but we do have many chief ministers who are women and who have a little more holistic approach in the way they are dealing with the virus. Of course, these are not, I don't want to make simplistic binaries. It's not about just women versus men. We need both to be able to fight something like this. But in terms of leadership, it is really commendable how women, whether they are head of organizations, whether they are taking care of their homes, whether they are out there walking miles with their family, whether they are waiting in the villages and creating solutions, what is going to happen when these people come back to their village where there is really no employment. Women are really taking these so-called ordinary women, I think, are taking extraordinary steps to just hold it all together. So I would just like to end with that. And hopefully there'll be other questions that I'd be happy to address.
Thank you very much, Nandita, for sharing these thoughts and these valuable ideas that very much nourish the reflection. You are being a little humble, of course, because, of course, maybe you are not in a position of political power, but we know the importance of a voice that has a lot of outreach. And in that sense, and you already mentioned it a little bit, but maybe we can take this first question that is touching upon something that, that you have referred to in your presentation. It says, how can films and video campaigns aid in promoting tolerance and inclusion in these difficult times?
So how do we promote? Is that the question? Sorry, your voice went in the middle.
How can films or video campaigns could help in promoting values such as tolerance and inclusion? That is something that was at the core of the presentation you shared with us.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that has anyway been a problem even before the pandemic. And it's not just in India. If you see world over, there is a shift to the sort of more right-wing politics, if you say, identity politics, where inclusion and tolerance is becoming less and less, center focus, because there is this whole thing of how, division. We are dividing people in the name of religion. We are dividing people in the name of race. We are dividing people in the name of language and region. So that anyway, there is a shift happening, and I think it should be really interesting to study why that is happening. And it's probably also happening because the common man and woman is so disfranchised, is so lower, end of the hierarchy of things, has become so unimportant almost. They're only remembered when the elections come, that they are being given this carrot of having a sense of identity. And that's why we really, really need campaigns that can talk about tolerance and inclusion. In fact, I've been supporting a campaign in India called Dark is Beautiful. And it's about the skin color bias. In India, people don't like this color, even though in at least more than 80% Indians are of this color, yet we are made to feel small and sort of marginalized in that sense. And especially in the kind of hoardings, if you see advertisements, films, television, you almost wouldn't see a dark woman. You would imagine that there are no dark people in India. It doesn't reflect the reality at all. So I've been supporting that campaign, and last year it was 10 years of this campaign. So when they asked me, there was an organization called Women of Worth who started this campaign, and they said, could you do something about it? And I renamed the campaign from Dark is Beautiful, because women are too burdened by beauty and, you know, we have to look a certain way. At least you all can grow your beard. If our hair isn't colored, if we haven't done our whatever, you know, all these things, we still, even within the lockdown, especially those who are with their partners, probably feel even more pressured by it. So the pressures are different. We can't leave our facial hair or any hair for that matter. So I called it India's Got Color. And the reason to call even a skin color bias against the skin color bias, the campaign from Dark is Beautiful to India's Got Color, was the idea of inclusion. That can we just celebrate diversity? And India is extremely diverse. I often say India is like Europe. You know, there are similarities between, let's say, Italy and Spain, but there are also differences maybe between Sweden and Norway and, you know, Spain and Italy. So India is, you have to almost imagine it as Europe, as a continent. So, and yet we don't celebrate those diversities enough. There is an attempt to homogenize it. So I think diversity, tolerance, inclusion, these are not just words. They are the, you know, the core values that hopefully, if we are human beings, we need to live by. And definitely that's something that has become more stark during the pandemic. And if we don't learn from it, if we don't become more empathetic and compassionate through this, and if we are going to go back to our old ways, then it would be really a pity.
Thank you very much, Nandita. And UNESCO here in New Delhi is very proud to support your India's Got Color initiative. Actually,
yes, thank you very much for that as well.
The next question we have is related to this. In this crisis, we have, of course, seen an increase in the use we make of online platforms and social media. From your perspective, what could be the role of social media in challenging these issues such as racism and discrimination?
I mean, these days, in fact, we are completely dependent on social media. Even our newspapers are all online. You know, there is this is now our world, is the digital world. Social media, like any other platform, I think is a neutral platform. You can do good with it and you can do terrible things with it. I also get trolled very badly. So, you know, I've been also subject to a lot of hate comments, vile comments, hurtful comments, and you have to really develop a thick skin, because if you stand up for anything, there are also going to be people who are going to dislike you, who are going to be uncomfortable by your positions or your submissions. So, but I think there is also many good campaigns are happening. It has also democratized it. It has given power to every individual, and not just what we call celebrities or leaders or politicians or film stars, but just about anybody. Unfortunately, it has also become about how many likes and followers. So sometimes these things can become too much of navel gazing can happen. We can become too self-obsessive, and, you know, till I don't become popular, my word will not be heard. And in fact, I'm often told that, why don't you do commercial films? Because then more people will hear you. But then if you're going to lose your soul in trying to do that, it's of no value. So I think we need to use the social media very judiciously. And that, in fact, at this time, we have no excuse. Even some of the people who've stayed away, I'm a very hesitant user of social media. And the only reason I haven't completely gotten out of it is because I think it is a way to connect. And this pandemic has shown us that, you know, all of us are from Turkey, from Norway, from Paris, Delhi, Bombay, we're all connected. So I think this is a time to use the social media to do good, to bring out the best that we have to offer.
Thank you very much. And the next question is more on the side of the impact that this crisis has had on women. You were also referring to that in your remarks. And this talks about the physical well-being and the mental well-being. What do you think would be needed for women to overcome the aftermath of this pandemic when intrinsically, as you were saying also, before this crisis, there were already some inequalities and some additional burden to them.
Yeah. But I think after the crisis, women are going to be burdened even more. For one, there are so many layoffs, as we know. Jobs are going to be taken away. And in that, women are going to be the first casualty. Already the women workforce is quite low. In fact, in the last few years, it has decreased. I remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was about 27%. And I think now it is about 23%. So the first people to go are going to be women. And because a lot of the people think, oh, women are going to get pregnant, they're going to have periods every month, they're going to take holidays, they are unreliable, they may not be able to come out at night and stay up late, or, there are always these kind of excuses. And we are seeing that it's not true, because if you see the health workers, that's the sector that is really on the forefront of things, that is every day is vulnerable to this virus. And many of them are women, especially the whole nurse community, as we call, the health worker communities, of course, doctors, but also the health workers, the people who are helping on the front line. So many of them are women, and they are leaving their families, they are staking their lives. So it's a huge thing. But I think women are going to, unfortunately, are going to take the brunt of even post-pandemic. One, because the jobs are going to be less. Two, because the abuse that they have gone through, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's going, walking all of this and going back to their village, and the stress of the family of not being able to earn. Because if our rural areas had enough employment, why would these people come to the big cities and live in very, unhygienic and difficult circumstances in little slums? So there are huge issues, and I think women will be taking the brunt of that, both physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And we don't even have a proper structure to help in those conditions. Like, even going to a therapist in an educated family, it is still something that you don't talk too much about it. Or if you're, even in educated, affluent families, divorce is still not something that is looked at with, rolling your eyes a little bit, or it's not as common. So women are not, there's going to be a kind of a silence around these issues, which is the scary part. So if there are women watching, I think we can just urge that we mustn't, this is the time to speak up. It's not the time to, keep quiet. And maybe everything that we suffered for years and centuries, maybe this pandemic, let it push us to the brim, that we do come out with, we think, our solutions. We have much to offer. So this is not just a feminist line, although I think till it's not really equal, men and women both need to be feminist.
Thank you very much, Nandita, for that call for action and for that invitation to all of us. That concludes our time for this Q&A part of your presentation. And as I understand, you have another commitment and that you have to attend. I want to thank you very much for being with us.
It's a 9-year-old child commitment, because I work through the day. So evening is the only time that with story time. So I'm sure there's so many women on the panel that they will completely understand how we juggle. So thank you very much to all of you. And I will definitely hear it later.
Thank you very much, Nandita. It was a real privilege to have you with us today. And without further ado,
thank you, Ana Maria. Very nice to see you too.
Thank you and wish you a very good...
Namaste is going to anyway be the new way to greet everyone.
Yes. Namaste, Nandita. Thank you very much. And I wish you a very good evening.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Dear participants and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I will introduce our next speaker for today. Dr. Ayfer Yazkan Kubal is the Municipality Councillor and Head of EU and External Relations in the city of Kadiköy in Turkey. So we are very pleased to have you here with us today. And I will not delay myself more in giving you the floor for you to share your ideas and thoughts on these issues with our participants here today. Thank you very much, Dr. Kubal.
Thank you very much. Actually, I am humbled and honored to be here with you, with all these distinguished guests. Kadiköy is one of the 39 districts of Istanbul, and we have a population of 482,000 people. And I'm going to share with you our projects, what we have done from the perspective of a local government, what a municipality has been able to do in these times. But before going to this specific case of Kadiköy, allow me to say that the whole world has seen that we are interconnected with each other. We are connected with each other through our national resources and human resources. We should not turn our back to some geographies as it happens today. We should really raise our voice when multinational companies are carving up mountains, when they are carving up forests, and when they are digging in the oceans. So that's really, really important as we are talking under the umbrella of UNESCO, which is sort of the scientific body of United Nations. Let's put it like that. I think we have to really speak up against how natural resources of the world are being, criminally abused. Let's put it like that. Second thing I want to say is, in this COVID-19, pandemic, we have seen the simple man become the hero. We have seen that the municipality workers, which are, normal, social workers, the cleaning personnel, the health personnel, doctors, nurses, they have become the heroes of our times. And I hope that this will be an incentive for our kids, that they study science more and more, because when it's the case of secularism, when you look at it from a political perspective, and where you have to continuously, every day, every single hour, you have to defend secularism, laicism, that is utmost important. And that these scientific figures have become the heroes. I am very, very pleased that we will definitely invest in our human resources in the future. Third thing I want to say is, during this lockdown, we had disadvantaged groups, especially the people who were under strict lockdown for the last 2 months. That is the case for our citizens above the age of 65 and under the age of 20. And it really doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. The simple fact is, if you are alone and if you cannot do your shopping, if you cannot cook for yourself, you have to have a way to survive. And that's where our municipality has come up with its ideas. Now, I actually had a presentation, I'm not sure if you can see it, but we have had this Corona Crisis Desk, which was sort of directed by the Social Support Directory, and Social Support Directory has connected 7 different directories. And, everybody was in a bit of a shock at the beginning of this thing, but I've seen that, if you have trained and skilled and educated personnel, organizations such as the municipality can sort of find quicker ways to come out of this crisis. They can adjust themselves in a better way. So it's always good to invest in good human resources. The socially and economically disadvantaged people of Kadiköy have been served during this time. Allow me to say, we have told people to stay at home, but how are they going to stay at home? So we have had these mobile municipality service, which is like, buses that are turned into the municipality, and everything you could have done in the municipality building, you were able to do in these buses, and these buses sort of traveled from one neighborhood to the other neighborhood, so you didn't have to come all the way down to the city center. We had online cultural and sportive events, which is very important because Kadiköy is actually serving not just Kadiköy, but it's serving the whole of Istanbul, which is 16 million people, on a cultural level. Eating, wining, dining, that's like one of the most important features of Kadiköy. So we have these online cultural and sportive events, but that's of course only valid if you have a technology literate population so that they can use this technology. So that's that again comes back to education. We have actually canceled our non-urgent tenders, and we have shift working within the municipality. Our female staff with kids under the age of 12 and staff that has chronic diseases, they are on administrative leave. And the most important thing we have done is this organization of private and public coordination. Now, private and public coordination has been done by the municipality, and what we have suggested is these famous chefs and cooks, they came together, they have created the menus for the elderly, for the ones in need, and the municipality, Kadiköy municipality, has this chic, elegant, restaurant at the seaside. Now that has been turned into a giant kitchen, and it's serving thousands of people on a daily basis. Up till now, we have been able to serve about 62,000 hot meals. If you could, go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So private sector has been able to help us with the ingredients of these meals. We have cooked it and we have delivered it to the households, because these households are generally the households that cannot go out of their houses. We have had about 3,000 households that have received a dry food assistance from the municipality. We have done their medical and supermarket shopping. Hygiene packs have been delivered to 8,500 households. Why? Because the central government was not able to provide things such as masks for so many people, so we had to do something. So it's not you don't say I'm municipality, I'll only deal with municipality work. So you do everything you can, no matter what. And we have helped people for their ambulance transfers. We have provided 5,000 kids with kids packages, so to say. We have these shopping cards, which are very, very important for the socially and economically disadvantaged people. If you could go to the next slide, thank you. It's fair to say that we have 1,146 shopping cards for that many households, and some of them are getting these assistances twice. And in April, it's the same. Allow me to say that these social support systems are, continuous work. We have only we had to increase the number of social help. It's because so many people are now unemployed because of the pandemic, because so many workplaces had to shut down, and they have unfortunately laid down their employers. Also during the lockdown, we have done some pavement work. We have done paving. We have also a huge number of stray dogs and cats, and we have helped them because usually common citizens feed them now that they are in their houses. As the municipality's responsibility, we have been taking care of these stray dogs and cats. Another thing we have to say is that the city of Istanbul is 16 million people, and out of this 16 million people, Mr. Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu has been able to help and accept the applications for social support. That is 540,000 people. That's a huge number that shows us the city, poverty. 1 out of every 7 households has demanded this kind of help. Again, it's the result of the unemployment due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have been, as Istanbul Municipality, giving financial assistance to about 281,000 people, milk delivery to tons of milk delivery of in the amount of tons of milk are being delivered to children. And then we had this project, which is like immense, which is called Askıda Fatura. And Askıda Fatura is like a bill on the hanger, which is a literal translation, really. And this is like, if you are registered as living under the poverty line, you can apply to the municipality and say, I cannot pay my bills. I leave my bill in this pool, and the people who are financially well off, who want to help, they don't really know each other. They don't see each other. They don't hear each other. But you can simply pick up a bill, a gas bill, a water bill from this pool and pay for that. As you know, we are in the holy month of Ramadan, and I wish happy Ramadan to every single Muslim. And so this is like a combination of religious duty with, with your conscience. And it's also one of the few ways the Istanbul municipality can help people, because cash donations are not allowed. Somehow there are like legal problems that come up continuously. So that bill on the hanger project, Askıda Fatura project, was amazing. About half of the bills who were left on the hanger, so to say, have been paid by people with a conscience. Student loans are being given, psychological helpline is issued, and the social help of Istanbul municipality has gone up by about 50%. So on top of the normal, social help, we have had a 50% increase. So throughout the if you look at the whole thing, Kadiköy municipality and Istanbul municipality, if you have a crew that is, let's say, well educated, and if they are dynamic, they do find, solutions to help their citizens. There is a rise. There is a rise in violence towards women. That's for sure. It's because of the lockdown. I guess it's because of the way people are like, subject to each other somehow. And this is another problem for the whole of Turkey, for the whole of Istanbul. Another aspect that's very, very important for me is the role political leaders have in this pandemic. The political leaders, or any kind of leader, it doesn't have to be political. Any kind of leader has to be an example with the way they talk, with the way they behave, because especially the young people, since social media is so much in, they do have this feeling of copying what these leaders are doing. So I am encouraging people to act rationally, to stay away from going with this pandemic into racial, naming. And if anybody in the international committee, it might be the president of XYZ, it's whatever, they have to be named and they have to be shamed, because it's totally unacceptable when you turn this thing into a racial thing. This is something the whole world has to deal with. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. I can't hear you actually.
Yes, sorry, now you can hear me. Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Kubal. And we managed to see it on the screen after the very initial technical issue, but thank you very much for sharing with us all of these insights. I mean, first, I would begin by reminding, of course, that Kadiköy is a member of UNESCO's International Coalition of Inclusive and Sustainable Cities. And
yes,
in the previous presentation, we have heard about this tension of the need for cooperation, the need for more solidarity between the local, larger levels, international levels. And of course, there was an issue that we were facing before this crisis, a tension between local and global, etc. But how do you feel and how do you see the role to bring change of cooperation and of this international solidarity from your perspective?
Well, when we're talking about international solidarity, I think we have to first, diversify about, whose interest lays where. Multinational companies have a different interest in agenda. I don't know, like some NGOs have different interests. Governments have different interests. Political parties have different interests. What I would like to encourage, and as Mrs. Duss has said, we may not individually have the power to change these things, but I think it's more important that United Nations, World Health Organization, UNESCO itself, they have to, I think, bring more and more people together. And these people should have a sense of, solidarity, international solidarity, because if you don't have this sense of international solidarity, there will definitely be no, outcome. And the world is on a path that is really like following where money takes the whole world. We shouldn't have to follow the capital. And it's like there is this invisible hand that is leading the world, and that hand's only interest is economic benefits. But that economic benefit doesn't fit with the interest of the people of the world in general.
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, like the words inclusion and sustainability will acquire a new meaning after this crisis, and that is part of the coalition itself. Another question that we have for you: you have shared with us a lot of measures that have been put in place at the local level to support those facing different challenges across this crisis, but can you share some examples of support measures for local businesses, self-employed individuals, etc.? You were talking about the different interests of the different actors, but what could be done to support those more small actors, local businesses, self-employed individuals, etc.?
As the municipality of Kadiköy, at the moment, social support is given especially to people who are above the age of 65, individuals, and people with disabilities. And we don't discriminate, so to say. We don't ask, what nationality do you belong to, because in Istanbul by itself, you have about like 4 to 5 million refugees. And these refugees are also within this pool of people who are in desperate need. So I think local businesses, they will come, after the pandemic, and we have to see what is, next to happen. We will see when like restaurants and cafes and so on will be, open, what's going to happen, because it's not going to be like you will have a queue waiting in front of restaurants. People are scared somehow that restaurants are also a way to distribute this virus, which is actually not the case, but that's the idea. People have, gotten somehow over the media. So, and Kadiköy is, as I said, it has a specific feature of serving the whole of Istanbul regarding nightlife, artistic life. So I think Kadiköy will easily come back to its old self economically, at least. But I think at the moment, social support is only for individuals. Later on, maybe when things are back to normal, and of course, it's a matter of how much financially you can, sustain this thing, because now the municipality income is very, very low, because we have given up on some, taxes, because people cannot even, pay their rent. So we have postponed various bills, various taxes to, I don't know, like 6 weeks, 6 months later, etc. So there is the problem of income as well for the municipality.
Thank you very much. We have time for one final question that is related to something that has also been addressed previously. It's about some of the issues facing by some specific groups that are targeted during this pandemic, where gender, ethnic origin, etc., are matters of them struggling with specific challenges. What do you see could be potential solutions from the local level towards protecting these targeted groups?
I think from the local perspective is it's far easier than national level, because on the local level you can educate or create this sense of togetherness easily. You can use different projects so that people come together, and nobody's actually an outsider. You may think you're on the majority one day, but with one with one change you might be an outsider. So if people can see that nobody is actually an outsider, and locally it's easier to manage these things, because you have smaller, say, neighborhood markets, and you can create that sense of togetherness over neighborhoods, and they do sort of get to know each other within the smaller community. And so when there is more interaction, they do see that the other person, the one they thought is an outsider, is just another human being. And if you can increase that interaction at the local level, I think you wouldn't have this kind of discriminatory behavior. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your valuable insights.
My pleasure.
And, that concludes our time for this Q&A part of your presentation. I would like to thank you very much. And we will be moving ahead with the next presenter for this evening. I would like to introduce Ms. Kathleen Downie, who is the chair of the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities in Canada. And without further ado, I see that you're ready. I will give you 10 minutes to share with us your ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today. And thank you so much to my fellow panelists for their thought-provoking presentations. I want to first acknowledge that although we are on a virtual platform today, I am joining you from Treaty 8 territory in Canada, the lands of the Cree and Dene nations and the ancient gathering places of the Métis peoples. I'll talk a little bit today about the coalition in the context of COVID and outline the Wood Buffalo response to the pandemic, particularly when it comes to vulnerable populations. I'm also going to discuss a second crisis that my community has faced with a large portion of the region experiencing unprecedented floods and were evacuated a few weeks ago. So just to give a little bit of a context with the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities, you can go to the next slide there. The coalition is a growing network of approximately 80 cities that want to improve their policies against racism, discrimination, exclusion, and intolerance. The coalition has recently undertaken a number of publications that provide valuable information, resources, and promising practices related to inclusion at a municipal level. The usefulness of these tools isn't diminished due to the current pandemic, but rather it can provide a guiding path for how cities can respond to inequities that previously existed, but have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Next slide, please. For example, the publication on advancing women's equity outlines some of the ongoing inequalities, including the disproportionate number of women who take on caregiving roles, violence against women, a lack of women's voices at the table, and access to affordable childcare. During the pandemic, we see these inequalities coming into stark relief as women have been on the front lines of the fight against COVID due to their disproportionate representation in roles such as healthcare, cleaning, caring, cashiers, and catering. Violence against women has also been on the rise since the pandemic, and subsequent stay-at-home guidelines came into effect. The shutdown of daycares has been especially difficult for women who must tackle working from home while taking on a larger portion of childcare duties compared to their male counterparts, leading to a potential decrease in productivity. However, in Canada, women's voices have been center stage in the national conversation about COVID. Canada's National Chief Medical Officer and 9 other provincial medical officers are women. That's 50% of all CMOs. And they've been highlighted and applauded for their leadership. These women have had powerful and visible roles to play in the pandemic response and have become role models for many children. We remain hopeful that this will lead to more women and girls entering STEM and taking on leadership roles, as well as increased inclusion of women at decision-making tables. It's important as we move forward that women and diverse peoples are included at the table to guide planning and implementation of initiatives during COVID recovery and, of course, the reopening of economies. Another one of the CC UNESCO publication focuses on LGBTQ2+ inclusion. Similar to the women's equity publication, there's many principles that can be taken to consider inequality and promising practices to be implemented in the COVID context. LGBTQ2+ people are at higher risk of harassment and violence, and youth in particular are at risk for bullying, as well as experiencing rejection from their families. So for many LGBTQ2+ youth in particularly, home is not a safe and supportive environment, making stay-at-home orders challenging and sometimes dangerous. Due to homophobia and transphobia, the LGBTQ2+ population is at a higher risk for homelessness, depression, anxiety, and mental health challenges, as well as lower health outcomes compared to their heterosexual and cisgender counterparts. Discrimination within the healthcare system may also lead to a reluctance of LGBTQ2+ individuals to seek healthcare support if they are experiencing COVID symptoms. However, there are relatively simple steps that cities can take to support this population during the pandemic, including hosting gay-straight alliance programs and offering free online counseling supports. Next slide, please. I also want to offer some more specific initiatives and impacts of COVID from my own community of Wood Buffalo. I'll give you a brief context of that community as it's pertinent to the practices implemented due to COVID. So Wood Buffalo is a remote and northern community with an urban center that's surrounded by 9 rural hamlets, mostly made up of Indigenous peoples. It's an oil and gas focused economy, and since 2015 we have been in an economic downturn. And in 2016, as you can see in the picture here, we experienced the worst fire in Canadian history, and the entire community of 88,000 people were evacuated. Those living in poverty, seniors, Indigenous peoples, and immigrants were hardest hit just due to the areas that were most affected by the fire. And only 1/3 of the houses have been rebuilt and are back in their homes 4 years later. So in the current context of COVID-19, some of the lessons learned from the wildfire have actually been used to address the needs of the most vulnerable populations during the pandemic. This includes being able to track and monitor individuals experiencing homelessness in order to provide supports, being proactive with mental health supports, particularly for those already feeling isolated in their daily lives, and pivoting existing resources to meet emerging needs. Next slide, please. So while many of us have been told over and over again to stay home, this directive means really little to those experiencing homelessness who do not have a home to stay in. Crowded shelters and lack of public washrooms and hand washing stations have meant a higher risk for this population when it comes to COVID. And many cities have responded with larger spacing between shelter beds, temporary hand washing stations strategically placed throughout their communities. Further, specific isolation centers using hotels or less ideally recreation facilities have been set up to ensure people experiencing homelessness who are COVID symptomatic can be isolated away from other shelter patrons. Wood Buffalo has provided hygiene, cleaning supplies, and activity kits for this population to mitigate the risk of contraction and to encourage people to stay in whatever facility they are using rather than frequenting other areas. During the wildfire, it became really apparent that tracking and monitoring the movement of this population was incredibly important to ensure the safety and well-being of people. So in this vein, phones and minute cards were actually provided to people with regular check-ins conducted by caseworkers. This supported not only mental health needs and access to food and hygiene, but also to detect symptoms early and take the appropriate steps to prevent further spread of the virus throughout this population. Post-wildfire, it became very apparent that mental health was a major challenge in our region, particularly for populations that already experienced some form of marginalization. So as the pandemic hit, it was important for us to focus on easy and accessible online supports for seniors, neurodivergent folks, LGBTQ individuals. Agencies launched wellness checks and online coffee chats. Activity kits were dropped off, including coloring and painting, and matching seniors with youth to help teach them technology, get them set up for things like Talk On, which is an online, over the phone, senior-led conversation group. In the aftermath of the wildfire, the municipality launched something called a Vulnerable Persons Registry, which people with disabilities or others requiring specific support during a natural disaster would be called, provided information, and then would be helped to evacuate if needed. So in the COVID context, we have activated the registry to provide regular check-ins for those registered, provide information and referrals, and just be a listening ear for those in isolation that may be experiencing anxiety or depression. Lastly, I'll mention that one of the biggest lessons was not to reinvent the wheel. Using existing programs and committees and pivoting them to meet emerging needs is not only cost effective, but can happen more quickly and effectively as the structure is already in place and the relationships are already built. So one example is that municipal staff who could not work from home were actually redeployed as isolation angels, providing food hampers and activity kits to those in isolation. Next slide, please. Just a few weeks ago, Wood Buffalo experienced another unprecedented disaster and issued a second state of emergency on top of the one already implemented due to COVID. A 23-kilometer ice jam caused river waters to rise dramatically, flooding the downtown core and resulting in numerous evacuation orders, and a region-wide boil water advisory, which remains in place today. Safely evacuating those most vulnerable populations was something that we learned was vital during the wildfire experience, and additional measures obviously were required due to the pandemic. So drive-through registration centers were implemented with proper protective equipment and social distancing. The Vulnerable Persons Registry, which I already mentioned, was activated and used effectively to evacuate those with disabilities, seniors, and others with barriers. And because we had already distributed phones to individuals experiencing homelessness as part of the pandemic response, we were able to check in with each one of those individuals, encourage them to evacuate, and notify search and rescue if needed. We were also able to track where those individuals found interim lodgings and facilitate mental health and addiction supports, as well as getting them medications or other emergency needs. The use of translators for evacuation notices, boil water advisories, and other important emergency notices was done collaboratively between the municipality and local not-for-profit organizations. This was really key in addressing some of the language barriers that were present. We had many immigrant and refugee families, as well as many Indigenous folks that were affected. Lastly, a curbside support center was set up with phones and laptops for evacuees who needed to register for Red Cross support or other financial aids, but either did not have access to the technology or required support with digital literacy. So I'll leave it there so we can have some time for questions. And this last slide here just has my contact information if you would like to reach out, as well as the CC UNESCO website, where you can find the link to the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities and the various publications and resources available.
Thank you very much, Kat, for your timely presentation and for sharing with us all of these examples from your local response to this pandemic. I mean, if we move ahead to the questions that we have received from our participants, the first one relates to what you have been talking about, addressing the specific needs of disadvantaged groups. What should be done from your perspective, from the local perspective specifically, to promote and adapt like suitable policies for what we are already talking about as the new normal?
Mm-hmm. I think that the first thing is making sure that you have diversity at those tables where policies are being developed. It's really important that those voices are at the table and being able to advocate for themselves, and having a look at policy through different lenses. One of the things that we have implemented in Canada is the gender-based analysis. And that's really become very useful in viewing policies and practices through various lenses and keeping gender specifically, but various lenses of marginalized and vulnerable populations in mind when developing policies.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that sharp answer. Having them at the table is, of course, something very, very important. In that sense, the next question is still speaking about specific targeted groups for discrimination and vulnerability, but on the side of what can the public do? How can people contribute to support fighting this discrimination against vulnerable populations such as LGBTQ plus persons, homeless populations, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a responsibility of each and every one of us to be pushing forward anti-discrimination in our own lives. And I think, you know, as already mentioned, around social media is such a powerful platform that it can certainly be used to spread education, to call in individuals when we do see discrimination happening. I think that it is a very powerful tool that sometimes is used for the worst, but it can certainly be used for the betterment of equality initiatives. I think also there's a great opportunity here, as we are at home, and some of us may have more time than others right now at home, to be using that time to support our neighbors. One of the initiatives that we have at our municipality every year, of course, we're a northern community, so we have a lot of snow. So we have a volunteer program called Snow Angels, where volunteers they remove the snow from driveways for seniors. And we had to do a big call out. We had more seniors than ever that were in need, and the response from everyone in the community who maybe had more time on their hands was incredible. And I think using those volunteers and getting out there and helping each other, particularly during this time of need, is really important.
Thank you very much, Kat, for these answers. I will have to stop this Q&A session for now, because we need to move forward with our next speaker. But if we have some time in the end, we will get back to some of the questions that were addressed to you to continue with this. So I thank you very much for your understanding. And without further ado, we now will have the privilege of listening to Her Worship Mayor, Ivona Kisoyer, the mayor of Freetown from Sierra Leone, who will share with us her valuable insights on the ongoing crisis and how leadership can contribute to address the issues that we have been discussing. So please, Her Worship, we would like to give you the floor and thank you very much for being here with us today.
Hello.
Thank you. Yes, we can listen to you.
Glasses.
Asked you to start your video.
Where are my glasses?
Thank you very much, Excellency. Welcome, welcome, Her Worship, and we are very glad to have you here. We would like to, of course, thank you because we know that you are at the same time dealing with many other things and happenings in your city. So thank you very much for being here with us, and you have the floor to share with us and your insights.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here to join other colleagues. Good afternoon, everyone. Are my slides going to come on?
Thank you. Yes, we will have your presentation now.
Right. So thank you very much. I mean, as the title says, this is the Freetown City Council COVID Preparedness and Response Plan. And as we talk about inclusion, you'll see through the structure that that's a primary driver. So if I could have the next slide, please. Okay, we, like many cities, have we have characteristics which are peculiar to our own setting, and those characteristics on how we respond to COVID. So if I could go on to the next slide, which really just summarizes some of the very specific challenges we have as a city in Freetown. So next slide, please. The question of inclusion is very much at the heart of what we're doing. Ours is a city that is characterized by informality, a population of 1.2 million people, but of that population, 68 informal settlements are home to about 35% of our population. People who are living in highly dense environments. It's as a city, the density is 8,450 persons per square kilometer, but that is intensified in our informal settlements. And those people who already are at the margins in many respects in society face attendant problems, access to running water, very low income, all of which, when you look at a response to COVID, have a role to play. The basic message which is given by government, by WHO, etc., is wash your hands frequently. If only 47% of people don't have access to running water, wash your hands is a very difficult statement to make real. And the whole concept of social distancing or physical distance is also really complicated when you have informality in housing, informality in employment, and informality in transport. So those aspects are what the FCC plan really seeks to address, and in doing so, to make sure we're leaving no one behind. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, in developing our plan, we're coming from the experience of Ebola, and those lessons that we learned during Ebola have become quite relevant. We've moved on to the next slide so people can refer back, but if I just stick with this slide now, okay, we're back to the lessons. All right, so 4 key lessons. 1, command and control. 2, community ownership. And that, again, speaking of inclusion, it's making sure that everybody has a stake and everybody is involved and there's an internalization of messaging. And 3, closing the gap between protocols and practice. the difference between what's being said in a command center, in an Ebola response center, Corona response center, versus what's actually happening on the ground, and tracking and isolating the virus. So if you come on then to the next slide, which takes our three elements of our plan. First is behavior change messaging. Second is behavior change support. And third is isolation and containment support. And if you look to the next slide, in providing that behavior change messaging on the next slide, we were looking at this response initially in phases. The reality is everything has come together very quickly. So we have all of these layers conflated into a single response. So if you go on to the next slide. Behavior change messaging. For inclusion, inclusion really speaks to, in our context, the vulnerable, the marginalized, women, persons with disability. One of the things that we're very keen to do in the way we're approaching COVID is to make sure that people actually understand and that those who are most vulnerable understand. So this first element looks at or creates community-owned outreach teams. It creates messengers who can translate in a way which is most acceptable to the listeners. It has a multimedia dimension, but it also has a very much community ownership dimension. And in the next slide, you'll see that we have layers of engagement, moving from the ward, the councillors, into the zones of the city, the training of community leaders, and then the reaching out to special interest areas, markets, car washes, car parks, informal settlements. But as you go on to the next slide, you'll see that these teams we've set up are horizontal and they're vertical. They're horizontal in the next slide. They're horizontal, next slide. Next slide, please. They're horizontal, thank you, in that we've got community outreach teams working at ward level, going through through communities, but representing the communities. So, representatives of tribal leaders, of youth leaders, of women. But in addition to that horizontal, we also have vertical. So special groups like the Interreligious Council, the Ebola Survivors Associations, Person Living with Disability. So people who are on the edge, not just speaking to them, but speaking through them. So they are actually part of our messaging teams. And in the next slide, this brings us now to our second element, and that's behavior change support. So if I say to you, wash your hands and you have no water, or I say to you, you need to physically distance, but you live in an informal settlement, or you trade in a market where people are very tightly close together, I'm not really helping. So in this element, we're making sure that the messages can be implemented with the support of the council. So we are providing hand wash stations, we are providing water, we're installing tanks, rainwater harvesting systems, distributing locally produced masks, face masks, because when you can't socially distance, one thing you can do is increase protection by wearing a mask. And our target group are those who are vulnerable, those in the market, those in informal settlements, the 68 informal settlements, the 42 markets, and our 74 community health clinics, which are known as peripheral health units, PHUs. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. And if we move on, this is just a little bit more data on that makeup. Another element of those behavior change support to ensure that we really can make the difference and the vulnerable can actually respond to the outbreak is by providing food during lockdowns. And we've experimented with the community kitchen in the first lockdown, and we're looking to see how we'll be able to provide additional ones of these informal settlements in future lockdowns. But on a more sustainable level and to build resilience beyond Corona, beyond COVID-19, we are introducing urban farming in informal settlements. It's a concept that was already there, but we're enabling communities to scale it up. So in the event of a lockdown, there is some element of resilience because there are things that can be planted with a very short turnaround, particular vegetables. And finally, we're also, disinfecting the markets and ensuring that we are able to upgrade some of our maternal facilities in our community clinics. Our last element is isolation and containment support. And here again, it's about inclusion. Here it's about having the ownership of the people most at risk. So including teams, the community outreach teams, also supporting contact tracing, providing PPEs to our healthcare workers, not just those in the facilities that we run, but also private health practitioners who would otherwise close their practices and put more people at risk. And we found that the government support to those in quarantine in informal settlements is sometimes falling short. And because they are the most vulnerable in our communities, we are also providing supplementary food to those who are quarantined. With the numbers growing, we've put a contingency plan in place to also provide isolation facilities, again, focused on those who come from informal settlements. So our target in stopping COVID-19 is recognizing that the most vulnerable, those on the margins, are very often the ones most at risk. And so our response has been tailored to speaking to them, to speaking through them, and to providing them with support. Thank you.
Worship, thank you very much for this valuable presentation and for sharing all of this big amount of actions that you have implemented in Freetown at the local level to address this crisis. If you have a couple of minutes with us, we can maybe address some of the questions from the large number of participants that have listened very attentively to your kind presentation. Thank you, Worship. Just, I would like to, for example, would like to hear from you on, you already have like the 3-year Transform Freetown plan that includes an inclusive approach to address the challenges of your city. The question that we receive is how this plan is being modified to address the specific issues of discrimination and exclusion that are arising due to this crisis, Worship.
Okay, so we're in the process of implementing and I think one of the things that the response has really brought into sharp focus, practical level, we've discovered more informal settlements. That sounds hard to do, but we actually have through our desire to ensure that we are supporting all of them. We are, in terms of the modification to the Transform Freetown plan, I think what we're seeing is an acceleration. So we already had within that plan investments in water, but the plan is phased. And there were priority sectors, there are 11 priority sectors, and there were sectors for various years, which would be a sort of a deep dive. Water wasn't a deep dive for this year, but it's suddenly become incredibly important for us to invest in water. So in addition to doing the rainwater harvesting systems, which are a quick solution, we're also working now on tapping into groundwater in some of these informal settlements. Parts of our plan of Transform Freetown looked at informal settlement upgrades, neighborhood upgrades, and the provision of 5,000 affordable homes. Again, through this outbreak, one of the questions, the issues that comes up repeatedly is how are you doing social distancing in slum communities, in informal settlements? And my answer is, you can't take water out of a stone. You can't suddenly not have had space yesterday and then you have space today because there's COVID. But what it shows is just how important it is. So I was on a call this morning, again, we're pushing and we're trying to use, in some instances, COVID response money to be able to accelerate the work we were wanting to do with the PHUs, which is to convert 4 of them into maternal facilities so that BMOGs, so that women can actually have their babies in their communities. That was work we had started pre-COVID, but we didn't have funding for it. And now COVID has meant that we urgently need to give mothers the confidence to go and have their babies not at home, but in a facility. Many are frightened of going to the main hospital because of the association with COVID. So being able to get these PHUs converted, and that work is starting now, has been, you know, it's sort of bringing the Transform Freetown agenda forward.
Thank you very much. Just as a final question before we let you go and continue with your very tight schedule, we would like to hear from you, dear Mayor, like your ideas on the type of social changes and the mindset shifts that would emerge from this crisis.
So good one. I started this week a 15-minute chat with the city called Let We Talk About Corona. It runs from 9:15 to 9:30, and it's just me, a monologue on Facebook and on radio. And we just talk about the things which are bothering us in the city, or which are challenging us in the city. And when you talk about mindset change, that really is a challenge. Masks, I mentioned masks. We're giving out 120,000 masks. I've just run from being presented with 100 masks by a little 9-year-old girl who sold them herself as part of her contribution to the vulnerable in the city. But we have given out thousands of masks, and yet I walk along the streets and people aren't wearing them. And it's getting to that point, and it's a journey, right? It's a journey which you have to just be committed to, of people saying, okay, there are 128 cases. That's not me. That's not near me. And even though we've been through Ebola, this is different. It's different because of the asymptomatic element, that you can be infected and not look infected. Whereas our experience in the city before was, if you were sick with Ebola, you look sick. And getting that mindset shift is a challenge. Getting that shift, which is a journey even to transform Freetown, of civic responsibility, of knowing that my decision is impacting the life of the next person, is a challenge. But maybe this is an opportunity for us. And we are hoping through our 3 times a week conversations as a city and many other interventions to build on this sense of community and communal responsibility for our shared future.
Thank you very much, Worship. As we approach the end of this session, I would just like to pass you back the floor for a final message. Any further words that you would like to share with us this day?
I think this pandemic is bringing the world closer on so many levels. You know, people around the globe sharing common stories, common experiences, different stories, different experiences. But it really gives us an opportunity to recognize the value that we all have, the contributions we can make. And I guess my message would be, let's stay safe. Let's continue to work together as city leaders to bring this outbreak to an end in our cities. But let's not lose what we have started. Let's not stop engaging beyond COVID. And let's remember that the climate change agenda continues to be as important as it was before the outbreak. So thank you all, and thank you for the platform.
Thank you very much. It has been a privilege listening to you. And now I will invite maybe Kat Downie to give us in 1 minute her final thoughts in order for us to move forward to the conclusion of this webinar.
Thanks. I think the biggest thing right now for me is how we are looking forward to recovery and to reopening economies, and how can we do that differently, and how can we do that in a more inclusive way. So thinking proactively now about the ways in which we would like to change the ways that society and our communities are. How do we put in place right now plans and practices that will make those shifts long term? What can we learn from the pandemic and keep some of these new policies that we have in place that are supporting those most vulnerable in our communities, and how do we make those more permanent as we move forward?
Those are indeed very, very excellent questions. And we thank you very much also, Kat, for your time and for being here with us today. I will move now to give the floor to Dr. Kubal, who could maybe share a final message with us before we conclude.
Right, final message. Final message would be that the world population has to realize as quickly as possible that this is not the last pandemic. This is not the last natural catastrophe we will see. We will have these problems in the future regarding our water supplies. We will have these similar problems regarding oxygen levels. The thing is that we are carving up the world. And unfortunately, I don't want to say like, there's this, fight between the West and the rest of the world, but it really seems like the West keeps forgetting that there's a whole world also that has to, use its natural resources. So we have to protect wildlife, nature, environment as much as possible, and we have to have sustainable development. That's all I want to say. And I think world leaders, whoever they are, wherever they are, they should, stop running after multinational companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kubal, for your final message. And of course, it has been a real privilege to hear from all of you, all of our panelists. Some of them have already left. But this, just like we have participants from all over the world, we have heard from a very diverse set of panelists who shared with us their thoughts, their actions, their ideas as change makers across this pandemic. Dear participants, before we close our session for today, we are going to hear a final message from the Director of Partnerships and Outreach from UNESCO Social and Human Sciences, who is here with us. So I will invite Magnus Magnusson to please address the participants with his final remarks to close this webinar. Thank you very much. Magnus.
Thank you very much. I will not be able to switch on my screen, I just noticed, even though I put on a suit jacket just for all of you. But so apologies for that, but I will just then use my microphone. So first of all, it's a privilege to thank all of the speakers during this webinar today on women leaders at the forefront of COVID-19 responses. And I would really like to express a warm thanks to Her Excellency Ingjerd Schou, to Nandita Das, to Ayfer Kubal, and Kathleen Downie, and Her Worship Mayor Yvonne Sawyer. I've been very impressed by all of the interventions you've done from your different perspectives and situations, and it's indeed very interesting and impressive and important to share these experiences and perspectives. And I'm very glad that UNESCO could help do that. And that's part of our role. It is clear that the world is coming together in some ways, even though you can hear in the news that globalization, or global cooperation rather, is suffering. But I think on another level, in fact, I think the world is coming together because we can all relate to the suffering or the potential suffering that this pandemic can bring or has brought. In my family, we've already been affected by it, and luckily we've come through it. So I think there is a potential for empathy. There is a potential for realizing our common vulnerability. There is a potential for learning how the world actually links to different dimensions of biodiversity, the biosphere with our society and our lifestyle choices. I think all of these dimensions kind of come home to us in a way that maybe nothing else could do. So while we need to get through this, and while we all hope, of course, that this would be, that the suffering will not extend to more people than already has happened, the pandemic also guides us into, I think, a new way of interacting. And UNESCO is pursuing this this moment in time by trying to bring people together through these types of webinars. We had 150 people online today. We have several of these at UNESCO, and we're also launching a Thinking the Future After the Pandemic exercise in a few days, actually, where there will be again a focus on particularly women and women leaders to think about the post-COVID-19 world, and to bring visions into the discussion that could be, you know, beyond what most of us can imagine, and opportunities, but of course also risks. So please stay tuned for additional seminars. They will be announced on the website. We are keen to summarize also these lessons into policy relevant messages to governments. As you know, we have member states, 193 member states in UNESCO, who are expecting to have support from UNESCO in gathering these lessons and experiences that you have portrayed today. So that's something we need to do. I think you know, without any so to speak, priority over any of your comments, I must just say that I was very impressed by what we heard from the Mayor of Freetown in terms of the behavioral changes and the messaging related to it, the behavioral change support, and then also the isolation containment support measures. I think these are very impressive initiatives that you're taking in an environment where you don't have the resources that some other countries have. So I think all countries can learn from that, including my own country in Sweden, which is of course in the news all the time for having a specific approach. But I'd like then to conclude again, just to thank all the speakers, all the participants, all 158 of them. I saw that was, I think, the max number we had. And also the colleagues, of course, from my own sector here at UNESCO for arranging this seminar. And with that, I'd like to conclude and wish you a good day, a good morning, a good evening, wherever you are. And
thank you very much,
back
Magnus.
to you, Juan Pablo.
Thank you very much, Magnus. My role for closing this seminar is just to ask all of you participants to check the little box in the chat next to us. We have sent you a message asking you to complete a little feedback form. You just have to click there, and if you have still 5 minutes to give us your feedback on the webinar today. I would like to thank all of those who asked the questions to the panelists. Of course, due to limited time, we could not address them all, but I hope we have, I have done my best to have a very rich debate and dialogue with them. We also invite you to the next edition of the webinar that will take place on Monday, 18 May at 4 p.m. or the same time as today. It will be held in English. And I conclude by saying that this has been the webinar Changemakers at the Forefront of COVID-19 Responses, the 5th in the series of international webinars addressing racism, discrimination, and exclusion, called Inclusion in the Time of COVID-19. It has been a privilege to have all these panelists today with us. I thank them again, but I also thank all of you who joined today. And we have been delighted as UNESCO that you have joined us. and we hope to see you next time for more on inclusion in the times of COVID-19. Thank you very much to everyone, and I wish you a very nice end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.